The baby monitor was the only light left on in the house. It sat on the kitchen counter, glowing a soft green, and through its small speaker came the steady rhythmic sound of a child breathing in her sleep. Seo Jinuan stood over the sink with a bottle in one hand and a dish towel in the other, and for a moment, just a moment, he allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in over a year. Peace. Amara was upstairs, humming to herself as she folded laundry, her voice drifting faintly down the hallway. The apartment smelled like the vanilla candle she always lit before bed. Somewhere outside, rain had just begun to tap against the windows, soft and unthreatening, the kind of rain that made people want to stay wrapped in blankets and do nothing at all. Jinuan smiled at the monitor. On the small screen, baby Nia lay curled in her crib, one tiny fist pressed against her cheek. Then the screen flickered. Just once. A blink, like a camera adjusting to new light. He didn't think much of it. Old wiring, maybe. He set the bottle down and reached for his phone to check the time, and that was when Amara's voice called from upstairs, closer now, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. "Jinuan, did you move Nia's blanket?" He frowned. "No. Why?" "I just checked on her 10 minutes ago. It was folded at the foot of the crib. Now it's over her." The two of them looked at each other across the apartment, and for the first time that evening, something in the room changed temperature. Jinuan crossed to the monitor and stared at it. Nia was still sleeping. Still breathing. Nothing on the small gray screen suggested anything was wrong. But his stomach had already dropped somewhere it hadn't dropped in over a year, somewhere he had promised himself he would never let it go again. He set the phone down. He walked toward the stairs. And halfway up, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. He almost let it go to voicemail, the way any tired new father would on an ordinary rainy evening. But something about the timing, something about the flicker on the monitor and the blanket that moved itself, made his thumb hover, and then press green. He raised the phone to his ear. Silence at first. Just breathing, slow, even, deliberate. Then a voice, calm and almost gentle, said 4 words that would end whatever peace he had left. "She has your eyes." The line went dead. Jinuan stood frozen on the staircase, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to a dial tone that suddenly sounded very loud in the quiet house. Upstairs, Amara had gone still in the doorway, watching his face change from confusion to something colder, something she hadn't seen since the day she agreed to marry him. "Jinuan," she said carefully. "Who was that?" He didn't answer right away. He was already moving past her, into the nursery, scooping Nia gently out of her crib despite her sleepy protest, holding her against his chest like she might vanish if he let go for even a second. "Jinuan, you're scaring me." He finally looked at her, and in his eyes was something Amara recognized instantly, because she had seen it once before, a long time ago, in the earliest days of their marriage, before she understood why he flinched at unknown callers and checked the locks 3 times before bed. Fear. Not for himself. For them. "Pack a bag," he said quietly. "Just the essentials. We're leaving tonight. Before we go any further, we'd love to know something. Wherever you're watching this from, whatever city, whatever country, whatever corner of the world you found yourself curled up in tonight, drop it in the comments below. We're always amazed by how far these stories travel, and we want to know you're out there with us. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because Jinuan's story is far from over, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Now, let's rewind. Because to understand how a father ended up clutching his daughter on a staircase at midnight, terrified of a voice on the phone, we have to go back. Not far. Just 6 hours. 6 hours earlier, this had been the happiest day of Seo Jinuan's life. The morning had started with sunlight. Real sunlight, warm and golden, spilling through the curtains Amara had chosen when they moved into the apartment together, back when the future still felt uncertain and fragile between them. Jinuan woke to the sound of Nia fussing in the next room, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't wake with his hand already reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, didn't wake scanning the room for exits. He woke smiling. "Your turn," Amara mumbled beside him, not opening her eyes, though the corner of her mouth curled upward in a way that told him she was fighting back a laugh. "I got her last night," Jinuan said, propping himself up on one elbow. "And I carried her for 9 months," Amara replied without missing a beat. "I believe I still have the higher score." He laughed, actually laughed, a full unguarded sound that still felt new in his own chest, like a muscle he was only beginning to learn how to use. He kissed her forehead and rolled out of bed, and as he walked toward the nursery, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror and almost didn't recognize the man looking back. Not because he looked older, though he did, faint lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. But because he looked, for the first time in years, unafraid. Nia quieted the moment he lifted her from the crib, her tiny fingers immediately finding his thumb and gripping it with a strength that always astonished him. He held her close and whispered, "Good morning, little warrior," the nickname he had given her the day she was born, 3 weeks early, fighting to breathe in an incubator while he stood on the other side of the glass promising her, silently, that he would burn the world down before he let anything hurt her. He carried her into the kitchen, propped her carefully in the bouncer chair on the counter, and attempted, for what was probably the 40th time, to make breakfast without setting off the smoke alarm. He failed. Predictably. Jinuan. Amara's voice carried a mix of alarm and barely contained laughter as smoke curled from the pan. "What did you do to the eggs?" "I turned my back for 1 second. You turned your back for 4 minutes. I watched you scroll through your phone." "That was reconnaissance," he said, waving a dish towel at the smoke alarm until it finally silenced. "I was checking the weather." "For 4 minutes. The weather is very important, Amara. Lives depend on accurate forecasting." She was laughing now, properly laughing, the kind of laugh that used to be rare from her, the kind that had taken months of patience and honesty and small, quiet apologies to earn back. She crossed the kitchen, took the ruined eggs from his hand, and kissed him, quick and easy, the way people kiss when they've stopped counting the days since the last time they trusted each other completely. "I'll make breakfast," she said. "You hold your daughter and try not to burn down the apartment I just spent 3 weekends decorating." He obeyed without argument, settling into the chair by the window with Nia against his shoulder, watching Amara move around the kitchen with an ease that still felt like a small miracle to him. There had been a time, not so long ago, when he wondered if she would ever look at him without suspicion again. When every locked door and every security camera he had insisted on installing felt like evidence in her mind, proof that he was hiding something monstrous rather than protecting something precious. She hadn't been wrong to wonder. He had been hiding something. But that morning, watching her hum to herself while flipping pancakes, watching their daughter sleep peacefully against his chest, Jinuan allowed himself to believe, just for a while, that the past had finally stopped chasing him. He was wrong. But he didn't know that yet. The doorbell rang at 9:15. Amara wiped her hands on a towel and moved to answer it, but Jinuan was already standing, already positioning himself between the door and the kitchen in a way that had become instinctive over the years, a habit Amara used to hate and had slowly come to understand. It was Kong, Jinuan's oldest friend, his former head of security, the one person outside of Amara who had earned unconditional trust over more than a decade of loyalty that had been tested in ways most people never had to imagine. Kong stood in the doorway in a dark coat, rain still clinging to his shoulders from outside, and the moment Jinuan saw his face, he knew this wasn't a social visit. "Kong." Jinuan's voice shifted instantly, the warmth of the morning replaced by something sharper. "What's wrong?" Kong glanced past him, toward the kitchen where Amara stood holding Nia, her expression already tightening with concern. "Can we talk?" Kong asked quietly. "Alone." Amara's jaw tensed, but she didn't argue. She had learned, painfully, that when Kong used that tone, it meant something serious, and that whatever it was, Jinuan would eventually tell her, even if it took him longer than she wanted. "I'll be right back," Jinuan said, pressing a kiss to Nia's forehead before following Kong out onto the balcony and closing the sliding door behind them. The rain had softened to a mist, and the city stretched out below them, gray and indifferent, cars moving through streets that had no idea what was unfolding 11 floors above them. Kong didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Someone accessed the old security archive last night," he said. "The one from 5 years ago. Before you shut everything down." Jinuan's stomach turned cold. That archive was supposed to be permanently sealed. It was. Someone still got in. Kang's voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent years learning not to panic in front of his employer, even when panic was the only reasonable response. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were looking for. Property records. Personal addresses. Photographs. Photographs of who? Kong hesitated, and that hesitation told Jinuan everything before the words even left his friend's mouth. Of Amara. And the baby. The city noise seemed to disappear. Jinuan gripped the balcony railing, knuckles whitening, his mind already racing through 5 years of buried history, half-forgotten enemies, and the one man he had spent half a decade convincing himself was dead. "It can't be him," Jinuan said, more to himself than to Kong. "He's gone." Everyone confirmed it. "Everyone confirmed a body was never found," Kong corrected gently. "That's different from confirming he's dead." Jinuan closed his eyes. Behind them, faintly, he could hear Amara's laughter drifting through the glass door, unaware, still humming, still believing the morning was simple. "I want extra security on the apartment by tonight," Jinuan said. "Discreet. I don't want her to know yet." "Jinuan." "Not yet, Kong." His voice cracked slightly, just slightly, the first sign of the fear that would consume the rest of his day. "She just started trusting me again. I am not going to hand her another reason to be afraid unless I have no other choice." Kong studied him for a long moment, the way old friends do when they know an argument is pointless but feel obligated to try anyway. Finally, he nodded. "I'll have a team in place within the hour." "Quiet. She won't notice." "Thank you." Kong turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the balcony door. "Jinuan, if this is really him, you understand what he wants isn't property, or money, or even revenge on you directly." "I know what he wants," Jinuan said quietly. "Say it," Kong pressed. "Out loud. So you actually hear it." Jinuan looked through the glass at Amara, at Nia sleeping peacefully in her arms, at the fragile, ordinary happiness he had spent years building out of the wreckage of his old life. "He wants to take away the one thing that makes me weak," Jinuan said. "He wants my family." The rest of the morning passed in a fog for Jinuan, a strange and disorienting split between the version of himself that laughed with Amara over lunch and the version of himself that was quietly rearranging security patterns in his mind, calculating exits, recalculating trust. Amara noticed. Of course she noticed. She always noticed. "You're somewhere else today," she said as they sat together on the couch that afternoon, Nia finally asleep in the bassinet beside them. "You've been somewhere else since Kong left." "I'm right here," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how unconvincing they sounded. Amara set down her cup of tea and turned to face him fully, the way she used to when she was preparing to ask a question she already suspected she wouldn't like the answer to. "Jinuan, I promised myself something, after everything that happened last year. I promised I would never let us go back to secrets. So I need you to tell me the truth. Is something wrong?" He looked at her, at the openness in her expression, the trust she had rebuilt so carefully and so painfully, and every instinct in him screamed to protect her by keeping her in the dark, the same instinct that had nearly destroyed their marriage the first time. "It's probably nothing," he said, hating himself even as he said it. Kong found some irregularities in an old security file. "He's just being cautious." "Irregularities like what?" "I don't know the full details yet," he lied. "He's looking into it." Amara studied his face for a long moment, and Jinuan felt, uncomfortably, that she could see straight through him, the way she always could when it mattered most. But she didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she reached over and laced her fingers through his, and said something that would haunt him later, something so simple and so devastating in hindsight. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "we'll face it together. No more hiding things to protect me. I'm stronger than you think, Jinuan. I've already survived losing you once. I can survive almost anything else." He wanted so badly to believe that was true. He wanted so badly to trust that whatever was coming, she could weather it standing beside him rather than shielded behind him. He had no idea, in that moment, just how quickly that promise would be tested. The package arrived at 4 in the afternoon. There was no return address. No delivery service logo. Just a plain brown envelope left directly outside their apartment door, which was, in itself, deeply wrong, because their building had a doorman who logged every single delivery, and Jinuan had personally reinforced that protocol after everything that happened before. He found it when he stepped out to take the trash to the chute. He almost didn't pick it up. Something in his gut told him not to, the same instinct that had once saved his life outside a burning warehouse 5 years earlier. But curiosity, or perhaps some desperate need to know rather than wonder, made him crouch down and lift it from the floor. Inside was a single photograph. Amara, standing on their apartment balcony, holding Nia against her chest, her head tilted slightly downward the way she always looked at her daughter, an expression of pure unguarded love that Jinuan recognized instantly because he had photographed that exact same look himself countless times. But he hadn't taken this photograph. Someone else had. Recently. From a distance. From an angle that suggested they had been standing across the street, looking directly up at their home. Jinuan turned the photograph over with trembling fingers, and on the back, in handwriting he recognized immediately, handwriting he had spent 5 years trying to forget, were 7 words that stopped his heart entirely. Families make men weak, Seo Jinuan. He stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at those words, his mind traveling backward through years he had buried so deep he sometimes convinced himself they belonged to someone else. A different life. A different man. A man who once sat across a negotiating table from someone who smiled like a friend and killed like a stranger, a man whose empire Jinuan had dismantled piece by piece, refusing to let his own company become a vessel for laundering blood money, refusing even when threats escalated from subtle to explicit to violent. A man everyone believed had died in the collapse of his own operation. A man whose body was never actually found. Jinuan's hands shook as he folded the photograph and slid it into his coat pocket. Behind the apartment door, he could hear Amara singing softly to Nia, the sound so achingly innocent that it made his chest tighten with something close to grief for a piece he now understood was already slipping through his fingers. He didn't go back inside right away. He stood in the hallway, forcing his breathing to slow, forcing his mind to organize itself into something resembling a plan rather than pure panic. Because panic, he knew from bitter experience, got people killed. Calculation kept them alive. He thought of Kang's words on the balcony. He thought of the archive that had been breached, the photograph stolen, the years of careful, quiet peace he had built specifically to keep this exact nightmare from ever reaching Amara's doorstep. He thought of the man behind the handwriting, and the memory arrived with brutal clarity, dragging him backward 5 years into a boardroom that no longer existed, a version of himself that had been younger, colder, more willing to burn bridges in the name of principle. His name had been Han Seo-Jun. On the surface, a legitimate investor, charming, articulate, generous with praise and patient with negotiations. Beneath the surface, the architect of a laundering network that moved money through shell companies and shuttered factories, funding operations that Jinuan, even in his most ruthless years as a young CEO, refused to be associated with. He remembered the meeting where he said no. He remembered the silence that followed, and the smile Seo-Jun wore even as his eyes turned to something Jinuan could only describe as predatory. "You're making a mistake," Seo-Jun had said calmly. "Men like you always think principles matter more than survival. One day, Jinuan, you'll learn that lesson the hard way." Jinuan hadn't backed down. He exposed the network. He testified. He watched the empire collapse over 18 brutal months, watched arrests made, assets frozen, associates turning on each other in a desperate scramble to avoid prison. And at the center of it, Seo-Jun vanished during a raid on his final safehouse, presumed dead in a fire that consumed the building before authorities could confirm otherwise. For 5 years, Jinuan believed that story. For 5 years, he built a new life on top of that belief, married Amara, welcomed Nia into the world, allowed himself to imagine a future unburdened by the past. Now, standing in a quiet hallway with a photograph in his pocket, he understood with sickening clarity that the story he believed had been a lie all along. He pushed open the apartment door. Amara looked up from the couch, Nia dozing against her shoulder, and whatever expression was on Jinuan's face must have betrayed him instantly, because her smile faded before he even said a word. "Jinuan, what happened?" He crossed the room and sat down beside her, his hands still trembling slightly, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he made a decision that terrified him more than any confrontation he had faced in his old life. He decided to tell her the truth. "5 years ago," he began, his voice low and unsteady, "before I met you, there was a man. Someone I destroyed, professionally, because he was using my company to launder money for people who hurt innocent people to protect their profits. I thought he died when everything collapsed. I have spent 5 years believing that." Amara's face had gone very still, very pale. "And now?" Jinuan reached into his coat pocket and placed the photograph on the coffee table between them, the image of her and Nia on the balcony, taken from a distance, taken by someone who had been watching them without either of them knowing. Amara stared at the photograph for a long, silent moment. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were bright with something between fear and fury. "He's alive," she whispered. "And he knows about us. Amara." "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice sharper now, cutting through the softness of the afternoon like glass. "How long have you known someone might come after us, and you didn't tell me?" "I found out this morning," Jinuan said. "Kong came to warn me. I didn't want to frighten you until I knew more." "You didn't want to frighten me." Amara stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, Nia stirring slightly against her shoulder before settling again. "Jinuan, we made a promise. This morning. Just hours ago. No more secrets. I was trying to protect you." "You keep saying that." Her voice cracked, equal parts hurt and anger. "You kept saying that a year ago too, right before I found out you've been paying off journalists to keep stories about your past out of the news, right before I found out you had cameras in places I didn't know about, right before I nearly left you because I couldn't tell the difference between protection and control." "This is different. Is it?" She turned to face him fully now, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes, though her voice remained fierce, unwilling to break entirely. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same. A dangerous man from your past. A secret you decided I couldn't handle. A choice you made for me instead of with me." Jinuan stood, crossing the room slowly, carefully, the way he might approach someone standing too close to a ledge. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should have told you the moment Kong warned me. I let old instincts take over, the instinct to shield you from everything ugly in my life, even when shielding you means lying to you. I'm sorry, Amara. I am so sorry." She didn't respond immediately. She looked down at Nia, sleeping peacefully, utterly unaware of the storm gathering around her, and something in Amara's expression softened, though the fear remained. "What does he want?" she finally asked. "I don't know for certain," Jinuan admitted. "But knowing him, knowing what he built and what he lost, I don't think this is about money anymore. I think this is about proving that I was wrong to believe I could destroy him and walk away untouched. I think he wants to take from me exactly what I took from him." "Which was?" "Everything," Jinuan said quietly. "His empire, his reputation, his freedom, before he vanished. Everything he built, gone, because of a decision I made at a negotiating table 5 years ago." Amara was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gray city below, rain beginning to fall harder now, streaking the glass in uneven lines. "So he wants to take everything from you too," she said finally. "Starting with us." Jinuan didn't answer, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm the fear already settling into both their chests, heavy and undeniable. That evening, after Kang's security team had discreetly repositioned themselves around the building, after Amara had finally allowed Jinuan to hold her on the couch in silence, exhausted from the weight of the day, the baby monitor sat glowing on the kitchen counter, and everything, for a brief while, seemed to settle into an uneasy stillness. Until the screen flickered. Until the blanket moved on its own. Until the phone rang, and a calm, gentle voice said 4 words that shattered whatever fragile peace remained. "She has your eyes." Jinuan stood frozen on the staircase, Nia now cradled tightly against his chest, Amara beside him with a packed bag already in hand, both of them staring at each other in the dim hallway light, neither one certain of what came next, only certain of one unbearable truth. Whoever had been watching them from a distance was no longer watching from a distance. They were close. Close enough to know exactly what Nia looked like when she slept. Close enough to move a blanket without anyone hearing a door open. Close enough to prove, with a single phone call, that no lock, no security team, no promise of protection would be enough to keep this family safe. "We need to move," Jinuan said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Amara nodded, her face pale but resolute, the earlier anger replaced entirely by something sharper, more determined. She reached out and gripped his arm, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that steadied them both. "Together," she said. "Whatever happens next, Jinuan, we face it together. No more secrets. No more shielding me from the truth. If he wants to take everything from us, then he's going to have to go through both of us to do it." Jinuan looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos unfolding around her, utterly unaware that somewhere out in the rain-soaked city, a man she had never met, a man who believed he had lost everything because of her father's choices, was already setting a plan into motion. A plan that had been 5 years in the making. A plan that was only just beginning. They moved quickly through the apartment, grabbing what mattered most, leaving behind everything that didn't. Kong was already waiting outside by the time they reached the lobby, his expression grim, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked quiet, urgent instructions to someone on the other end. "The safe house is ready," he said as they approached. 20 minutes out. My men will escort you the entire way. Is it secure? Amara asked, her voice tight with fear she was visibly fighting to control. Kong hesitated for the briefest moment, a hesitation so small most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Jinuan noticed. He always noticed. As secure as we can make it on short notice, Kong said carefully. It wasn't the reassurance any of them needed, but it was the only one available. They climbed into the waiting car, rain hammering against the windows, the city lights blurring past in streaks of white and red as they sped toward whatever uncertain safety awaited them. Jinuan held Nia close, watching the streets pass by, watching for any sign of black vehicles, any indication that they were being followed. Beside him, Amara stared straight ahead, her jaw set, her fingers laced tightly with his despite the tension radiating from both of them. "Jinuan," she said quietly, so quietly he almost didn't hear her over the sound of the rain. "Are we going to be okay?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise her, the way he had promised her so many times before, that he would protect her, that nothing would ever touch their family, that the past would stay buried where it belonged. But he had made that promise once before, 5 years ago, standing across a boardroom table from a man he believed he had defeated. And that promise, it seemed, had only ever been a delay. "I don't know," he said honestly, because after everything, after every secret and every lie, honesty was the only thing he had left to offer her. "But I know we're not facing it alone. Not anymore." Amara squeezed his hand, and in the darkness of the car, with rain streaking down the windows and the city disappearing behind them, they drove toward a safe house that neither of them yet knew had already been compromised. Somewhere across the city, in a room lit only by the glow of a laptop screen, a man who had spent 5 years rebuilding himself from the ashes of everything he lost watched a tracking signal blink steadily along a familiar route. He smiled, slow and satisfied, and picked up his phone. "They're on the move," he said quietly into the receiver. "Just as we planned. Let them believe they're safe for now. We'll let the family settle in first. Fear tastes better when it's earned slowly." He set the phone down and turned back to the screen, where a single photograph remained open, the same photograph he had left outside their apartment door hours earlier, Amara and Nia on the balcony, unaware they were being watched. "Enjoy your safe house, Seo Jinuan," he murmured to the empty room. "It's the last peace you'll have for a very long time." Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and relentless, washing over a city that had no idea a war from the past was about to collide violently with the present, threatening to destroy the one thing Seo Jinuan had spent 5 years fighting to build. A family. A future. A fragile, hard-won peace. And somewhere in that same city, moving further away from danger with every passing mile, a father held his daughter close, unaware that the true reckoning had only just begun. The safe house sat at the end of a narrow private road, half swallowed by pine trees that Kong had chosen years ago for exactly this reason. No streetlights. No neighbors close enough to notice headlights at midnight. A place built for disappearing. The car slowed as it turned off the main road, gravel crunching under the tires, rain still falling in a steady gray curtain that blurred the edges of the world outside the windows. Jinuan kept Nia pressed against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, his eyes fixed on the tree lean as it rolled past. Beside him, Amara hadn't let go of his other hand since they climbed into the car. Her grip had gone from frightened to fierce somewhere along the highway, as though she could keep the night at bay through sheer force of will. 2 minutes out, Kong said from the front seat, his phone still pressed to his ear, murmuring something low to the driver of the second car trailing behind them with 2 more of his men inside. Jinuan said nothing. He had learned, over the years, that silence was often the only honest response he had left when fear took up all the space where words used to live. The house came into view slowly, a low structure of dark wood and stone, its windows black, its porch light dead. Jinuan noticed that first, before anything else. The porch light was dead. "Kong, I see it." Kang's voice had changed, the casual authority replaced by something clipped and alert. He said something into the phone, fast and low, and the driver eased off the accelerator, letting the car roll to a stop 100 meters short of the house instead of pulling into the drive. "Why are we stopping?" Amara asked, her voice tight. "Standard precaution," Kong said, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. He turned in his seat, looking back at Jinuan. "That light has a battery backup. It doesn't go out unless someone cuts it manually." The second car pulled up alongside them, and two of Kang's men stepped out into the rain, weapons held low and close to their bodies, moving toward the house with the practiced quiet of men who had done this before. Jinuan watched them go, his heart hammering against his ribs in a rhythm that matched the rain against the windshield. "Stay here," Kong said. "Both of you. Doors locked. Engine running." "Kong, I need you to trust me on this, Jinuan. 5 minutes. Let my men clear it." Jinuan wanted to argue. Every instinct in him wanted to be the one walking toward that dark house, the one absorbing whatever danger waited inside rather than sitting helpless in a car with his family. But he understood, in the cold, rational part of his mind that had kept him alive through worse nights than this one, that his instincts were not the ones that mattered right now. Nia mattered. Amara mattered. And the safest place for both of them, for the next 5 minutes, was exactly where they were. He nodded once. Kong stepped out into the rain and followed his men toward the house, and the car fell into a silence so heavy it felt like something physical, pressing down on all three of them. Amara stared at the dark windows of the safe house, her jaw tight, her free hand resting protectively over Nia's back even though the baby was securely held against Jinuan's chest. "This was supposed to be the safe option," she said quietly. "This was supposed to be the place where we didn't have to be afraid." "It still might be," Jinuan said, though he didn't believe it, not fully, not with the porch light dead and the rain falling so hard it seemed to be trying to erase the house from the world entirely. Minutes passed. 2, 3. Jinuan counted them in the rhythm of his own pulse, watching the dark windows for any flicker of movement, any sign of Kang's men returning. At 4 minutes, his phone buzzed. Kang's name on the screen. He answered immediately. "Talk to me." "It's clear," Kong said, though something in his voice didn't match the reassurance of the words. "But Jinuan, you need to see this before you bring them inside." "See what?" "Just come. Leave Amara and Nia in the car for 1 more minute. Please." Jinuan looked at Amara, who was already shaking her head before he said a word. "No," she said flatly. "Whatever it is, I'm not sitting in a car in the middle of the woods while you go look at it alone." We agreed. Together. He wanted to protect her from whatever waited inside that house. He wanted it so badly it felt like a physical ache behind his ribs. But he thought of her words from that morning, a lifetime ago now, it seemed. "No more hiding things to protect me. I'm stronger than you think." "Together," he said, and reached for the door handle. The inside of the safe house smelled like dust and rain and, underneath that, something sharper, something that made the back of Jinuan's throat tighten before his mind fully registered what it was. Gasoline. Faint, but unmistakable, as though someone had splashed a small amount somewhere in the house and then thought better of finishing the job. Kong stood in the living room, his flashlight beam pointed at the far wall, where 3 words had been spray-painted in wide, dripping red letters, still wet enough to catch the light. "Found you again." Amara made a small, involuntary sound beside him, her hand tightening around Nia's blanket. Jinuan stared at the words, feeling something cold and familiar settle into his chest, the particular kind of fear that came not from immediate danger but from the certainty that he was being watched by someone who was always, always 1 step ahead. "When was this house last used?" Jinuan asked, his voice tight. 8 months ago, Kong said. "It's been swept for security every 90 days since. My man was here 2 weeks ago. Everything was clean." "So someone did this in the last 2 weeks." "Someone did this in the last 2 weeks, and knew exactly which house to target," Kong said grimly. "This location isn't public knowledge, Jinuan. It isn't in any file, digital or physical, outside of a very small circle." "How small?" Kang's expression tightened, and for the first time since Jinuan had known him, he looked genuinely uncertain how to answer. "Small enough that I don't like what I'm about to say next." "Say it anyway." Me. 2 members of my senior team, both of whom have been with me for over a decade. And the property attorney who handled the original purchase under a shell company 7 years ago." Kong exhaled slowly. That's the entire list. Nobody else has ever had access to this address. The implication settled over the room like a weight none of them wanted to carry. Amara looked between the two men, understanding dawning in her expression even before she said the words aloud. You think someone close to you did this, she said. Someone you trust. I think, Kong said carefully, that we need to leave this location immediately, and I think I need to make some very uncomfortable phone calls tonight. They didn't get the chance. The first gunshot came from outside, a single sharp crack that shattered the window at the front of the house and sent all four of them dropping instinctively to the floor, Jinuan curling his entire body around Nia in a motion so fast it happened before conscious thought could catch up to it. Amara screamed, a short, strangled sound she cut off almost immediately, some deep survival instinct silencing her even in the middle of terror. Down, stay down, Kong barked, already moving, already reaching for the weapon holstered beneath his jacket, already shouting instructions into a small radio clipped to his collar. Contact, front perimeter, multiple shooters, converge now, now. More gunfire erupted outside, overlapping now, the distinct sound of Kang's men returning fire mixing with an unfamiliar rhythm of shots that told Jinuan, with sickening clarity, that whoever had come for them had come in numbers. Back door, Kong said, low and urgent, crawling toward them across the floor. There's a tunnel beneath the pantry, built for exactly this scenario. It leads to a maintenance road half a kilometer east. Go now, both of you, I'll hold them as long as I can. Kong, you can't. I can and I will, and we don't have time to argue about it. Kang's eyes, usually so composed, carried something raw and urgent that silenced whatever protest Jinuan might have made. Get her out of here, Jinuan. Get both of them out. That is the only job that matters right now. Amara was already moving, crouched low, leading the way toward the pantry with a steadiness Jinuan hadn't expected, given how violently her hands had been shaking only minutes earlier. Fear, it seemed, had a way of narrowing itself down into pure function when the alternative was losing everything. The pantry floor gave way to a hidden hatch beneath a false shelf, and Jinuan felt a fresh wave of gratitude for Kang's paranoia, the same paranoia that had once nearly cost him his marriage and was now, in this exact moment, the only thing standing between his family and whatever waited in the dark outside. He passed Nia carefully down to Amara first, watching her disappear into the narrow tunnel below, then lowered himself down after her, pulling the hatch closed above him just as another burst of gunfire rattled through the house they were leaving behind. The tunnel was tight, damp, smelling of earth and old concrete, lit only by a thin emergency strip of glow tape along the base of the wall. They moved as quickly as the cramped space allowed, Amara in front with Nia held tightly against her, Jinuan close behind, every gunshot from above sending a fresh spike of terror through his chest with the unbearable knowledge that Kong was still up there, still fighting, still buying them the seconds they needed to survive. They emerged into a stand of trees exactly where Kong had promised, rain soaking them instantly, the sound of gunfire behind them now distant and muffled by distance and foliage. Amara turned to him, her face streaked with rain and tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed until this moment, Nia miraculously still quiet against her chest, too young to understand the danger, too young to know that her entire small world had nearly ended in a house full of gunfire. Where do we go? Amara asked, her voice shaking. Jinuan pulled out his phone with trembling hands, dialing a number he had hoped never to use again, a contact buried so deep in his contacts list it hadn't been touched in over 4 years. There's someone else, he said. Someone from before. Someone Seo Jinuan never knew about, because I made sure of it, a long time ago, before any of this started. The call connected on the second ring. A woman's voice, calm and alert despite the late hour, answered without hesitation. Jinuan. It's been a long time. I need help, he said, his voice raw. I need it now. There was a brief pause on the line, and then the voice responded with a certainty that steadied something in Jinuan's chest for the first time all night. Tell me where you are. They ran through the rain for nearly 20 minutes, cutting across the maintenance road and into a stretch of dense forest that Jinuan navigated more by memory than sight, years-old training resurfacing in his body even as his mind screamed with panic. Amara kept pace beside him, refusing every offer to hand Nia over, holding her daughter as though letting go, even for a moment, would be the thing that finally broke her. They reached the rendezvous point just as headlights appeared through the trees, a dark sedan pulling to a stop on the shoulder of an old service road. The window rolled down, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, assessing eyes that swept over both of them in a single practiced glance. "Get in," she said. "We'll talk once we're moving." Her name was Yoon Harry, and years ago, before Amara, before Nia, before Jinuan had allowed himself to imagine a life built on anything other than survival, she had been the one person inside his old organization who had never once betrayed his trust. A forensic accountant turned whistleblower, the woman whose testimony had helped bring down Seo Jinuan's laundering network alongside Jinuan's own. She had disappeared from his life deliberately, both of them agreeing it was safer to sever all contact once the danger seemed to have passed. Apparently, it never had. "You look terrible," Harry said, glancing at Jinuan in the rearview mirror as she drove them deeper into the dark countryside, away from the safe house, away from Kong, away from the gunfire that Jinuan prayed his oldest friend had survived. "It's been a difficult night. I heard the alerts on my scanner 20 minutes before you called," she said grimly. "Multiple shots fired, private residence, no official police response dispatched, which tells me whoever attacked that house has enough reach to keep this quiet. That's not amateur work, Jinuan. That's someone with resources." "Seo Jun," Jinuan said quietly. Harry's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "I thought he was dead." "So did I." In the back seat, Amara had gone very still, her eyes fixed on Nia's sleeping face, her jaw set in the particular way Jinuan had come to recognize as her holding herself together through sheer stubborn will. He reached over and took her hand, and she let him, though she didn't look up. "There's something else," Amara said quietly, so quietly he almost missed it over the sound of the rain against the windshield. "Something I need to tell you. I should have told you a long time ago." Jinuan felt his stomach drop for an entirely different reason now, a cold unease creeping up his spine that had nothing to do with gunfire or dead men returned to life. "Amara." She finally looked up at him, and in the dim light of the car, her eyes carried something he had never seen in her before, not in all their years together. Guilt. Old, buried, carefully hidden guilt. "Before I met you," she said slowly, "I worked for a woman named Choi Yerin, a financial consultant. I didn't know, not for a long time, what her company actually was. I was young, and I needed the job, and I didn't ask questions I should have asked." "Amara, what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "that Choi Yerin's company was a shell inside Seo Jun's network. I worked there for 8 months, processing paperwork I didn't understand, before I quit because something about it felt wrong. I never told you because by the time we met, I thought it didn't matter anymore. I thought it was a closed chapter, a mistake from a life I'd already left behind." Jinuan stared at her, his mind struggling to fold this new information into everything else that had unraveled tonight. "You worked for him. Even indirectly. You worked inside his network." "I didn't know what it was," Amara said desperately. "I swear to you, Jinuan, I had no idea." "I believe you," he said quickly, because he did, because the fear in her eyes was too raw, too genuine to be anything but true. But even as he said it, a new and terrible thought was forming in his mind, one he didn't want to give voice to, one that made the gasoline smell in that ruined safe house suddenly make a horrifying kind of sense. If Amara had once, even briefly, existed inside Seo Jun's orbit, then perhaps this had never been random. Perhaps their meeting, their marriage, the family they had built together, had never simply been the fortunate accident Jinuan believed it to be. Perhaps, somehow, it had always been part of something larger. Harry's phone buzzed on the dashboard, cutting through the tense silence in the car. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from focus to alarm in the span of a single second. "It's Kong," she said, holding the phone up so Jinuan could see the message displayed on the screen, 3 words that stopped his heart cold. "They took him." The rain hadn't stopped by the time they reached Harry's secondary safe house 2 hours later, a modest house on the outskirts of the next province, disguised behind the ordinary facade of a retired schoolteacher's cottage. Jinuan sat at the kitchen table long after Amara had finally fallen into an exhausted, restless sleep with Nia beside her, staring at his phone, at the message Kong had somehow managed to send before everything went silent. They took him. No further explanation. No follow-up call. No proof of life, no ransom demand, nothing but 3 words and a silence that had stretched for nearly 2 hours now, each minute of it feeling heavier than the last. Harry sat across from him, 2 cups of untouched tea between them, her expression grim in the low kitchen light. "He knew the risk," she said quietly. Men like Kong always know the risk. That doesn't make it easier. No, she agreed. It doesn't. Jinuan's phone buzzed against the table, and he snatched it up so fast the cup beside it nearly toppled. Unknown number. The same unfamiliar string of digits that had called him on the staircase hours earlier, a lifetime ago now, back when the worst thing he'd imagined was a shadow on a baby monitor. He answered on the first ring. Where is he? Silence at first. Slow, deliberate breathing on the other end of the line, the same calm cadence from before. Your friend is very loyal, the voice said finally, unhurried, almost pleasant. He didn't say a word about where you'd gone. Admirable, really. Loyalty like that is rare these days. If you hurt him... I'm not interested in your friend, Jinuan. I never was. He's simply useful, for now, as a demonstration. A demonstration of what? That I can reach anyone close to you, Seo Jinuan said, and hearing the name confirmed after 5 years of uncertain silence sent a fresh chill through Jinuan's entire body, even though some part of him had known, had suspected, from the very first word on that staircase. Your security chief. Your wife's old employer, though I imagine she's already told you that part of the story by now, hasn't she? I do love watching old threads finally come together. Jinuan's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles ached. What do you want? I want what you took from me, Seo Jinuan said simply. Everything. But I'm a patient man, Jinuan. I've had 5 years to plan exactly how I intend to take it back, piece by piece, the way you took mine. Tonight was only the beginning. Consider it a formal introduction. Let Kong go. This is between us. Nothing, Seo Jinuan said softly, is ever only between two people. Not when there's a wife involved. Not when there's a daughter. A pause, deliberate, cruel in its patience. She really does have your eyes, you know. I saw her up close tonight, while you were busy crawling through a tunnel like a frightened animal. Beautiful girl. It would be such a shame if something happened to her before she's old enough to understand why. The line went dead before Jinuan could respond, the dial tone once again unbearably loud in the quiet kitchen, and he sat frozen with the phone still pressed to his ear, staring at nothing, understanding with sickening finality that whatever safety he believed he had built over the last 5 years had never truly existed at all. It had only ever been borrowed time. Harry watched him carefully from across the table, reading the answer in his face before he said a word. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. Is he? No, Jinuan said, his voice hollow. He's not. Upstairs, faintly, he could hear Nia begin to fuss in her sleep, and beneath that sound, Amara's voice, soft and exhausted, soothing their daughter back into a peace that Jinuan now understood, with a grief too large to fully hold, might never truly be safe again. He set the phone down on the table, his hands finally steady despite everything, some cold and familiar resolve settling over him the way it used to, years ago, before Amara, before Nia, before he let himself believe that the man he used to be could stay buried forever. That man was still in there. He always had been. And for the first time since the phone rang on that staircase, Jinuan understood that surviving the night ahead wasn't going to be enough. He was going to have to become someone he'd sworn he would never be again. Thanks so much for sticking with this story all the way to the end. If any part of it hit you, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me which moment stuck with you the most. I read every single one and they genuinely make my day. And if you've got a second, let me know what city or country you're watching from tonight. I'm always amazed at how far these stories reach, and I love picturing all of you out there. If you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because Jinuan isn't done fighting yet. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.